I will tell you exactly how it happened, because it is the kind of story my counsel has tried to reframe into something more dignified. They have drafted 3 versions. In each one, Lyra arrives at the palace through a formal introduction, a letter of introduction, a referral from a respected house. In each one, I am presented as a king who made a deliberate choice. I did not make a deliberate choice. She got into the wrong carriage. It was the 23rd day of the cooling season, and I had sent my enclosed coach to the eastern gate to collect Ambassador Havrick's senior aide, who was late by 2 hours and had sent a runner with apologies. My driver waited. My sister Asha waited inside the coach, because Asha has never in her life missed an opportunity to be present when something interesting might happen, and she had claimed the seat cushion was more comfortable than the ones in the hall. Lyra was running from a creditor. This is the part my counsel particularly dislikes, but she has told me the story herself, and I have no interest in softening it. She had taken a commission for 12 formal tunics from a merchant who then claimed the fabric dye had run in the first wash and refused to pay. The merchant had sent a collector. The collector had arrived at her workroom at the corner of the lower market precisely when she stepped out to buy thread. She ran. The nearest unlocked carriage, with the door swinging open, happened to be mine. She pulled the door shut behind her, sat down across from my sister, pressed herself into the corner and said, "Please do not say anything until the large man in the brown coat goes around the corner." My sister Asha looked at her for a long moment. "Of course," Asha said. They waited together while the collector passed. Then Asha said pleasantly, "This is the Alpha King's private coach." Lyra looked at the royal seal pressed into the door panel beside her. She looked at my sister's dress, which was not inexpensive. She looked at the outriders visible through the window, who were royal livery. "I see," she said. She did not faint or scramble for the door. She straightened her spine and said, "I apologize for the intrusion. I will get out at the next corner." "We are about to move," Asha said. "It would be safer to ride to the palace, and we can arrange transport back from there." "The palace," Lyra said. "Yes." There was a pause. "The large man in the brown coat," Lyra said. "Is he still visible from the window?" My sister looked. "He is." "Then perhaps the palace," Lyra said, and settled back against the cushion. I heard all of this later from Asha, who told it to me with a particular brightness in her voice that I have learned to recognize over the years as the brightness she reserves for the moments she has decided something without telling me first. By the time the coach arrived at the eastern approach, Asha had learned that Lyra was a seamstress from the lower city, that she had run her own workroom for 4 years, that she was 26 years old, that her mother had taught her to sew and her grandmother had taught her to argue, and that she had opinions about the cut of the current fashion in formal collars that were, Asha told me, entirely correct. I met her in the corridor outside the receiving hall, where I had come to greet the ambassador's aide, who was not there. What was there was my sister, and a young woman in a dress that had been mended at the hem, with very small, very precise stitches, in a slightly different shade of thread than the original. She was looking at the ceiling frescoes with an expression of honest assessment rather than awe. As I came around the corner, she glanced at me with the same expression, decided I was staff, and returned to the ceiling. "Selim," Asha said, "this is Lyra. She arrived in your carriage." I looked at Lyra. My wolf, which had been entirely silent for 22 months, since the morning Lady Verath of the River Provinces had returned my formal documents with a note explaining that she had reconsidered, woke up. Not loudly. There was no surge or howl. He simply opened his eyes, somewhere behind my ribs, and went very still in the way a hunting animal goes still when it has found the direction of something it has been looking for without knowing it was looking. I had not felt that in 2 years. I did not know what to do with it. "Lyra," I said, "welcome to Imberving." She looked at me again, and this time did not dismiss me as staff. Her eyes moved from my collar to my hands to my face. She made a small calculation. "You're the Alpha King," she said. "I am. I got into your carriage. I understand that you did." She looked at my sister, who was not helping, and then back at me. "I apologize," she said. "I was avoiding someone and your carriage had its door open. I will leave immediately. I only need to wait until a certain man in a brown coat is not standing on the corner of the market road." "There is no need to leave immediately," I said. This was not what I had planned to say. What I had planned to say was that I would arrange transport for her whenever she was ready. But my wolf was still doing that arrested, focused thing behind my ribs, and I was buying time to understand it. "Selim," Asha said, "perhaps Lyra could stay for dinner. She could leave after dark when the market roads are less busy." I looked at my sister. She looked back at me with perfect innocence. Lyra said, "I would not want to impose." "You are not imposing," I said. "Dinner is in 2 hours. The East Garden is pleasant this time of evening if you would like somewhere to wait." She considered this, with the same honest assessment she had given the ceiling frescoes. "All right," she said, "thank you." She did not say "Your Majesty," I noticed. The East Garden at Imbervine is terraced, built into the slope of the hill the palace sits on, with old stone walls and olive trees that have been there longer than the palace itself. In the cooling season, the light comes through them at an angle that turns everything copper and warm. I had not sat in it for some time. I sat there for the 2 hours before dinner, not because I had arranged to be there, but because I found myself there nonetheless. She was sitting on the low wall near the second terrace, her back to me, with a small leather case open beside her and a length of thread between her fingers. Someone, a hall servant most likely, had brought her a lamp. I should have gone back inside. I was the Alpha King of Imbervine. I had correspondence to review, and a letter from the Northern Trade Federation that required a response. I sat down on the bench 3 feet from her wall instead. She heard me, turned, recognized me again, and made a small movement as if to stand. "Please don't," I said. "I came to sit in the garden." She considered this, settled back, returned to the thread. After a moment she said, "I'm mending. I hope that's not undignified for the East Garden." "The East Garden has survived rather a lot," I said. "It will survive mending." She glanced at me sideways. "You're very calm about a stranger sitting in your private garden." "You sat in my private carriage," I said. "I have recalibrated." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, a willingness to have one, I thought. "The stitches," I said, because I was looking at her hands and it was easier than not looking. "They don't match." "I know," she said, not embarrassed. I ran out of the original thread. I had the closest shade I could find. Anyone who looks closely enough to notice the difference is already looking too closely, and that's their problem. My wolf behind my ribs did the thing again. That arrested, attentive stillness. "That seems like a reasonable position," I said. "It's the seamstress's creed," she said gravely. "We have several." "Are there others I should know?" She did think about it. "The second one is that any dress can be fixed if you're willing to take it apart entirely and start again." She paused. "I'm not sure that one applies to other things." "It might," I said. She looked at me then directly for the first time. Not the glancing assessment she had been giving me since the corridor. A real, even look. "What happened to your wolf?" she said. I went still. "I beg your pardon." "Your wolf. The Alpha's wolf is supposed to be present in the bearing. I grew up in the lower city. We all know what it looks like. Yours is there, but it's muted, like something dampened it." I had not been asked that directly by anyone in Imbervine. My counsel discussed it in careful circumlocutions. My sister did not ask because she already knew and chose instead to act. "He was quiet for a time," I said. "He seems to be waking." She looked at me for another moment, then returned to her thread. Good, she said simply. A king whose wolf is absent makes the whole pack uneasy. I sat in the east garden for the full 2 hours, which I had not done in 22 months. We talked. She told me about the merchant and the dye and the 12 tunics. I told her, and I am still not entirely sure why I told her this, but she asked, and the question was direct enough that deflection seemed absurd, about Lady Vereth and the returned documents, though not by name. She didn't want to be queen, Lyra said without judgment. She said she had reconsidered. Did she have a reason? Several in the letter. Were they fair reasons? I thought about it honestly, the way I had not let myself think about it for 22 months. Yes, I said, they were fair. Lyra nodded, as if this settled something. Then she did the right thing, she said, better before than after. My counsel did not share that view. Your counsel wasn't going to be her, Lyra said. My wolf behind my ribs made a sound, not a howl, something quieter, a single rumble of recognition, the way a wolf will rumble when it has come home after a very long time away and found the den exactly as it left it. The lamp between us cast copper light across her hands. Thank you, I said, which was not a thing I said often to anyone about things that mattered. She glanced at me sideways again. I only said what was true. That, I said, is rarer than you might think. Dinner and what came after it is the part my counsel wishes most that I would summarize. I will not summarize it. I will tell you what happened. Asha had arranged, without telling me, for Lyra to be seated at the family table rather than the general hall. It was a small dinner, only the family table, a handful of senior staff, and 2 visiting scholars from the Eastern academies. Lyra sat between Asha and one of the scholars, and she argued with the scholar about structural hem supports for about 20 minutes with the ease of someone who had no idea she was arguing in the royal dining hall. The scholar, who was 60 years old and had written 4 books on period textiles, appeared to enjoy it. I watched her from across the table. My wolf was no longer behind my ribs. He was sitting forward, alert, watching alongside me, with the focused intensity of a creature that has spent 22 months half asleep and is now, very seriously, awake. After dinner, Asha appeared at my side and said, in the voice she reserves for conclusions she has already reached, she should stay a few days. She hasn't got anywhere pressing to be, and the lower market roads are better in the morning than at night. Asha. The amber room on the south corridor is empty. The view is pleasant. You are doing this deliberately. I am doing this helpfully, she said. There is a difference. I looked across the hall to where Lyra was accepting a lamp from a hall servant with the same comfortable directness she gave everything, saying thank you in the way of someone who meant it and had been raised to mean it. 3 days, I said, if she wants to stay. She'll want to stay, Asha said, with the particular certainty of someone who has already had the conversation. She was right. Lyra agreed to 3 days, with the practical logic that her workroom could run without her for 3 days, and the market creditor would likely have moved on by then. She said this without coyness, without strategy, without any of the calculation I had learned to expect from the women my counsel brought to my attention. She simply weighed the facts and said yes. 3 days, I told my wolf. He said nothing. He was watching the lamp Lyra was carrying down the corridor, the small, warm circle of it moving through the dark hall, and he did not take his eyes off it until it turned the corner. The first day, she spent the morning in the workrooms off the south wing, which she had asked permission to use because her needle case included tools she had not had access to in some time, and there was apparently a loom there she wanted to look at. I found out about this because my steward told me, and I found out where the south workrooms were because I asked him. I did not go to the south workrooms. I had correspondence to review. But at midday, I walked through the south wing on my way to the council antechamber, which is on the north side of the palace and required no detour through the south wing whatsoever, and I heard her voice through the open workroom door. She was talking to Myra, my senior embroiderer who had worked in the palace since before I was born and who had, in my experience, two modes: efficient silence and sharp instruction. She was laughing. I had not heard Myra laugh in some time. I kept walking. In the council antechamber, my senior advisor Orvath, a careful man who had served my father and served me, and who I trusted in the way you trust a tool that has never broken, said, with the measured tone he used for matters he considered significant, "Your Majesty, the woman who arrived yesterday." "Yes. The household staff is talking." "About what specifically?" "That your wolf has been heard," Orvath said, audibly, "in the East Garden last night and again this morning near the South Corridor." I sat down. My wolf, when he is present, genuinely present, not dampened, makes a low sound that carries through stone the way thunder carries before the storm arrives. It is subsonic and felt rather than heard, but people know it. The pack knows it. It means the alpha is fully here, fully awake, and everything is accounted for. He had not made that sound in 22 months. "I see," I said. "The staff regards this as a positive development," Orvath said carefully. "There is, however, some curiosity about the cause." "The cause," I said, "is that my wolf is awake." Orvath waited. "I will let you know when there is something to report," I said. He nodded and let it go, because he was Orvath and he knew when to let things go. But at the door he paused and said, "She argued with Scholar Fenwick last night." "I know, I was there." "He sent me a note this morning," Orvath said. "He said she was correct about the hem supports." He paused again. "I thought you would want to know." He left. My wolf rumbled. The second day, I made no pretense about the south wing. I went to the East Garden in the late afternoon because that is where she had been the first evening, and I wanted to sit there, and she was welcome to come or not as she chose. She came. She brought her needle case. I brought the Trade Federation letter I still had not answered, and read it, and made notes, while she sat on the same low wall and worked on something I did not ask about until she held it up voluntarily. It was a half-finished collar, the formal kind that went with court wear, in a pale copper-colored silk. "For a commission?" I asked. "For your sister," she said. "She mentioned her festival collar has a loose attachment point," I offered. I looked at it. "You did that since yesterday." "I work quickly," she said without emphasis. "It's the lower city seamstress tradition. Speed is what the market buys." "What do you prefer?" I asked. "Speed or the other kind of work?" She thought about it with the honesty she gave all my questions. "Detail," she said finally. "The work where you can take your time and do each stitch the way it deserves, but that's not often practical." "It seems like it should be." "Most things that should be practical aren't," she said, in the tone of someone who had made their peace with it. The sun came through the olive trees at the low angle of the cooling season, the copper light it always made, and my wolf was very quiet in the particular way of a creature that is deeply, completely content. Not asleep, not dulled, still in the way of a still pool, full to the edges and not moving. I had not felt that in 22 months either. "What will you do," I said, "about the merchant, the 12 tunics?" "Chase the payment through the Traders' Guild," she said. "It takes longer, but the guild keeps records, and the merchant will want to keep his standing more than he wants to keep my money. Eventually." "Eventually" is a long time to wait for money you're owed. "The guild moves slowly," she agreed, "but it moves." She glanced at me sideways. "You have a court, don't you? A commerce court for disputes." "We do." "I could file there as a guest," she said. "It was not a request. It was a neutral observation, the kind you make when you are working out logistics." "You could," I said. "I could introduce the case myself if that would help it move faster." She looked at me. "That's not necessary," she said carefully. "You don't need to do that." I'm aware that I don't need to, I said. I'm offering because it seems like a reasonable use of the court. She held the copper collar against the light, checking the tension of a stitch. You are a very strange king, she said. I've been told. Who told you? You're not the first person to sit in my garden and say direct things, I said. She smiled, the full one this time, not the corner of the mouth willingness, the real thing, quick and unself-conscious, before she looked back at the collar. My wolf behind my ribs made a sound that was not a rumble. It was something older, something that did not have a name in the language I had been raised to speak, but that every alpha, going back to the first ones, had felt in the same way at the same moment. It was her. Not the bond igniting, not the mark. Not the great public moment of recognition that the old accounts describe. Just that, a single, quiet, entirely certain word from the deepest part of the wolf that had been looking in one direction for 22 months, and had just, in the copper light of the east garden, found what it was looking for. I said nothing. I did not reach for her hand. I picked up my letter and wrote the note I had been trying to write for 4 days, and it came easily, because something in me had settled. She stayed until the lamps were lit. When she rose to go, she said, "Thank you for the garden." "Thank you for the company," I said. Neither of us said anything else. She walked back up the terrace steps, and I stayed until the lamps were the only light left, and my wolf stayed with me, fully awake, making no sound at all. On the third morning, Asha came to my study. She sat in the chair across from my desk that my counsel uses for formal updates, which I had always privately called the worry chair, because no one ever sat in it when things were going well. "She's going to leave tomorrow," Asha said, "unless something changes." "I know." "Selim." "Asha." "Your wolf is awake," she said. "The whole household staff knows it, Myra knows it, Orvath knows it. Scholar Fenwick, who I sent a note to this morning, has written back to say that if the Alpha King's wolf has indeed chosen, historical precedent suggests that hesitation at this stage is." She checked the paper in her hand, inadvisable and historically unprecedented in its outcomes. "You asked Scholar Fenwick," I said. "He happened to be in the correspondence." "Asha." "Selim, I brought her here by accident," she said, with the directness she used when she was done being clever about something. "I know that. I did not plan it. She got into the wrong carriage, and I made a choice about how to handle that. And now your wolf is awake for the first time in almost 2 years, and she is going to leave tomorrow morning and go back to the lower city and file with the Traders Guild, and you are going to sit in this study and review correspondence." I looked at my desk. "You need to tell her," Asha said, "not as the king, as yourself before she leaves." "She knows nothing of the bond," I said. "She grew up in the lower city. She knows the Alpha's wolf by reputation, not by she has no wolf of her own, Asha. If I tell her what the bond means, what I think she is to me, she has no frame for it." "Then give her one," Asha said. She stood. "Tell her plainly, she is a woman who prefers plain things." She paused at the door. "And Selim, the formal presentation ceremony, the iron seal." I looked up. "Orvath has been suggesting it for weeks," she said. "The court needs to see the Alpha's wolf fully present. The ceremony is 2 days from now. It requires a presentation figure, traditionally a proposed bond partner or a significant emissary. And you have a woman in this palace who, if I am right about what the wolf is saying, would light the Imbervin seal for the first time in 60 years. She waited. Ask her. Give her the choice. Don't make it for her." She left. I sat in my study for a long time. Then I put down the Federation letter and went to find Lyra. She was in the south workroom again, and this time I knocked and waited. She called, "Come in," without looking up, in the voice of someone who expected a hall servant, and then looked up and saw me and straightened. "Your Majesty." "Please," I said. "You have never called me that before. I'd prefer you didn't start." She considered this with her honest, weighing look. "Selim," she said. "Yes." I sat in the second chair across from her work table. "You're leaving tomorrow." I said 3 days. "I know. I wanted to talk to you before you left." I set my hands on the table, which was easier than looking at her hands. "I want to explain something about the bond, the mate bond, the wolf's recognition. Have you heard of it? In detail?" She tilted her head. "I know the general, the alpha's wolf chooses a mate, the bond ignites and they're bound." "I know that." "What you may not know," I said carefully, "is that the recognition isn't always dramatic. It isn't always the mark burning to life in a public hall or the wolf rising in a thunder. Sometimes it's—" I stopped. "Sometimes it sounds like a single quiet word in a garden in the copper light, and you're the only one who hears it." She had gone very still. "My wolf has been silent for 22 months, I said. "Since Lady Vereth returned my documents. He was not broken, he was waiting. I didn't know what for. I know now." A long pause. "Selim," she said very carefully, "are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I am," I said. "I am saying it plainly because you prefer plain things, and because my sister, who is frequently right about matters she should not involve herself in, told me to tell you as myself rather than as the king." "Your wolf," she said. "Yes. The Alpha King's wolf," she said, as if clarifying to herself, "has decided I am." "His fated mate," I said. "Yes, that is what I believe." She looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at the copper collar on the work table, then at me again. "I'm a seamstress from the lower city," she said. "I got into your carriage by accident." "I know. I argued with you on the first night about textile hem supports." "I remember. I said you were a strange king." "I recall that as well." She turned the copper collar over in her hands. "And what do you want from me?" she said. It was not a hostile question. It was the same direct, practical tone she used for every question she considered important. What does the bond mean for me, if I don't have a wolf, if I'm not?" "It means nothing that you don't choose," I said. "The bond is the wolf's recognition. It doesn't compel you. You have no wolf to answer it unless you choose to. The bond makes you visible to mine. It doesn't bind you to anything you haven't decided." She looked at her hands. "I have a workroom in the lower city," she said. "I have a dispute with a textile merchant. I have 2 apprentices who are working a commission I should be back for by the end of the week." "I know." "I am not," she said, quietly but firmly, "a woman who wants to be swept into something because it's convenient for someone else's story." "I don't want that for you either," I said. "I am asking you to stay for 2 more days. There is a formal presentation ceremony, the Iron Seal, which tests the presence of the bond. It is public. If I am wrong about what my wolf is saying, the seal will show nothing, and you will know I have made a very significant error of judgment. If I am right, you will see it yourself in front of the court, and then you can decide what that means for you." She was quiet for a long moment. "If the seal shows nothing," she said, "what then?" "Then you leave," I said. "I will arrange transport, the guild letter for the merchant, and a standing commission from the palace for whatever work you choose to take, because you are an excellent seamstress, and Myra has apparently been telling the household staff so since yesterday morning." Something moved in her face, not quite the real smile, something between it and surprise. "And if it shows something," she said. "Then you know," I said, "and you still choose." She looked at the work table for a long time, the copper collar in her hands, the tools arranged in the needle case with the precision of someone who values order. "2 days," she said. "2 days." She nodded. "All right," she said. "But I want it on record." "Yes." "I'm only staying because the South Workroom loom is exceptional," she said, "and I haven't had access to one of that quality in 3 years." My wolf behind my ribs rumbled with something that was, unless I was significantly misreading him, amusement. Noted, I said. The loom is at your disposal. The presentation ceremony at Imberving is held in the great hall at the fall of evening, when the hall lamps are lit, and the terracotta stone of the walls holds the warmth of the day. The iron seal is set into the floor before the throne, a disk of black iron 3 feet across, inscribed with the founding sigils of the first alpha king of this line, worn smooth by generations of royal feet passing over it. It has not been active, has not glowed, has not responded to a formal presentation, since my grandmother stood before it with my grandfather 63 years ago. I did not tell Lyra this until the morning of the ceremony. She looked at me. 63 years. Yes. And you think I will? I think the wolf does not lie, I said, but I want you to see it for yourself. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what do I wear? I had thought about this. Whatever you choose, I said, you need not dress for the court. The seal does not care about silk. I wasn't worried about the seal, she said. She glanced down at her dress, which had been mended at the hem with the close but not matching thread. I was worried about the court. The court, I said, will see what the seal shows them. After that, they will not be thinking about the dress. She looked at me steadily. You're very certain. I am. Something in her face shifted, not quite the smile yet, but very near it. All right, she said, the dress it is. The court assembled at the fall of evening, as it always did for the formal presentation. The great hall held perhaps 300 senior advisors, household heads, scholars, the embassy representatives currently resident at Imberving, the senior wolves of the Pack Council. They stood in the curved arrangement around the iron seal that the ceremony required, and they looked, as courts will, at the figure being presented. She walked beside me, not behind me. I had not asked her to. She had simply positioned herself that way when we came to the door, which I thought was either instinct or a kind of commentary on the idea of walking behind anyone, and I had not said a word about it. She was wearing the dress with the mended hem. The court, to its credit, was largely expressionless. Orvath, near the front, had the face of a man reviewing calculations. Ashab, beside him, had the face of a woman who has already reached the answer and is watching everyone else work toward it. I brought Lyra to the edge of the iron seal. She looked down at it, then up at me. I step on it, she said, in a voice low enough for only me. You step onto it, I said. She looked at it again. The hall was very quiet, in the way of a hall where 300 people are very deliberately not making noise. Here we are then, she said. She stepped onto the seal. The iron lit gold. Not gradually, not with a slow build the way the accounts sometimes describe it, the gentle warming that gives the court time to adjust. It lit in the moment her foot touched the metal, a deep and immediate gold like the sun through copper, and the light rose from the inscribed sigils in a single breath, and filled the nearest 10 feet of the hall, and the assembled court took a collective step back. Not from fear, but from the involuntary response of a pack recognizing something fundamental and undeniable. The last time this seal had lit, my grandmother told me once, the whole hall had gone entirely silent in the way of deep water, not the held-breath silence of waiting, but the settled silence of something finally, completely named. It did the same now. Lyra looked down at the gold light around her feet. She looked up at me. Her face was not frightened, and it was not overwhelmed, and it was not performing wonder for the court. It was the face she made in the garden when she held the copper collar against the light to check a stitch. The honest, careful assessment of something in front of her that deserved her full attention. That's the seal, she said. That is the seal, I said. 63 years, she said. Yes. She looked at the light again, then at me. You are still a very strange king, she said. I reached out my hand, not as a command or a claim, just a hand offered the way you offer something to someone who has the full right to refuse it. She looked at it. The hall was still absolutely, completely quiet. She put her hand in mine. The seal blazed brighter for a moment, the way a lamp will surge when the oil catches fully, and then settled into a steady, warm gold that filled the hall all the way to the stone walls, and the wolves of the pack council, who had seen nothing like this in the span of their entire lives, did what wolves do when the alpha's bond is sealed and witnessed by the iron of the house. They bowed. Not a formal bow of ceremony. The deep bow, the one that comes from the bones, that a wolf gives to something it recognizes as right. 300 people, and the ones who were wolves bowed, and the ones who were not stood very still, and Orvath had stopped calculating and was simply watching, and my sister Asha had a hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes were too bright, and the scholar Fenwick, who had been invited as a witness for historical record, was writing already, with the speed of a man who has waited his whole professional life for this and is not going to miss a word of it. Lyra's hand was in mine. I could feel the bond, the actual bond, the wolf's bond, the thing the seal had just confirmed in gold light and stone, and the witnessed bow of a full pack, running through that held hand like a current of warm water, steady and deep and utterly without force. It asked nothing of her. It simply was there, the way the East Garden was there every evening in the copper light, waiting for whoever chose to come. Lyra of the lower city, I said, loudly enough for the hall, the seal of Imberving has spoken and my wolf has spoken before it. You are not obligated by either, but I am asking in front of my court and my pack whether you will stay. She did not look at the court, she looked at me. I have a workroom, she said, at volume, with the composure of someone who has decided to simply be herself in a room full of 300 people, and 2 apprentices and a merchant's guild dispute. All 3, I said, are solvable from Imberving. The loom in the south workroom, she said. It is yours. And the garden, she said, in the evenings. Always. A pause, the hall did not breathe. Then yes, she said. She did not shout it and she did not perform it for the crowd. She said it the way she said everything important directly, having considered it, meaning it entirely. Yes, I'll stay. The pack council bowed again, and this time the hall moved with them, and the gold light of the seal held steady around her feet, warm as a lamp in a copper evening. This is what my counsel wishes I would not tell you, because it is not the version where I made a deliberate choice and Lyra arrived through proper channels. She got into the wrong carriage. My sister made a decision without telling me. A seamstress sat in my garden and told me that a woman who didn't want to be queen had done the right thing, and my wolf woke up over the course of 3 days in copper evening light, and a collar mended in slightly wrong thread, and the seal that had been dark for 63 years lit the moment she stepped onto it, as if it had been waiting all this time for someone who would look at it with exactly the honest attention she gives everything in front of her. My counsel has 3 official versions that are more dignified. This is the one that is true. She sits in the East Garden in the evenings, when the light comes through the olive trees at that angle that makes everything copper and warm. She brings the needle case. I bring whatever letter has needed answering for 4 days and has been waiting for the right moment, and that moment has, since she arrived, reliably come. The apprentices came from the lower city 2 weeks after the ceremony. She sent for them herself, before I thought to ask. The Merchants' Guild dispute resolved in 40 days, which Orvath tells me is the fastest in 3 years, and he said this with the tone of a man who considers the speed entirely coincidental. Last week she finished the copper collar for my sister, who wore it to the autumn gathering and received, by all accounts, significant admiring attention. Lyra did not say she told me so. She is a woman of considerable restraint. The seal is still lit. A slow, steady, warm gold at the center of the great hall floor, present now in the ordinary day the way it is present in ceremony, the way the wolf's sound carries through stone when the alpha is fully awake and everything is accounted for. My wolf has not been quiet since the evening in the garden. He sees no reason to be. Neither do I.